Today we'll be looking at the Super GB Booster by Innovation. The Super GB Booster by Innovation is a device that allows you to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on your original PlayStation. Funnily enough, I found this device through a Facebook group that usually deals with retro gaming. Someone had posted a picture of it, and I was kind of fascinated. I did some searching, and I found that the device was real. I at first didn't think this thing actually existed. And after doing some searching and finding out that it is a real device, I found it on Amazon for $17, sold by Innovation themselves. I had only known Innovation as a company through one of those cheap Dreamcast arcade sticks, when the Dreamcast was popular, and having found this device, I've found some other interesting devices I might actually do some reviews for, but today we're going to talk about this Super GB Booster, GB standing for Game Boy. Now, as I understand it, the GB Booster uses the audio-visual ports of the parallel port on the PlayStation, as well as the controller inputs so you can play Game Boy games. I didn't think this thing was actually going to work, but it does, kind of. As you can see here, it's roughly the same size as the last parallel port Game Shark Pro for the PlayStation 1, just a little slightly larger, but it uses the same parallel port, and we're going to show you how that plugs in a minute. We're going to be using my special debug PlayStation. The review will be in an annotation on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you're interested in seeing more about that. This particular PlayStation is an older model, so it has the parallel port necessary. Now, not all PlayStations have this parallel port, so this won't work on your mini PS1s, and it won't work with certain PlayStations manufactured at a certain date. It absolutely has to have this parallel port because this device has to plug into it in order to work. One of the immediate drawbacks of using this device is that it can't emulate sound from the games. That's right, any game sound music cannot be played from the Game Boy through the device. But it does let you use CDs, so we're going to use Glory Hammer's newest album here to play with Pokemon, or we would if Pokemon had worked. More on that in a minute. When you start your PlayStation, it should show Innovation Super GB Booster if it's plugged into the parallel port right. Now, if you don't load a game on the top of the loader, it actually has a built-in game, as shown here, called Rebound Mission. Now, it's not a very good game, but it does display that the device is working correctly. You also never want to plug in your Game Boy game while the PlayStation is powered. You'll want to turn it off, plug the cart in, and then see if it loads. Now, I know in the footage before I showed Pokemon Crystal, it did not load. In fact, most of my Game Boy games did not load. The video you're going to see here are some of the games that I could get to load. I was able to get, I'd say, about 10% of the games to load in my collection, so there's that. Kirby's Tilt and Tumble reveals that the device is not emulating Game Boy Color hardware. Surprisingly enough, the only game that I was able to play in my collection that played decently, even with the slow emulation, was Ghostbusters 2 by HAL Laboratories. I'll put our review for that game in the bottom right. It definitely was playable, but you could definitely tell that the emulation is very slow. I'm assuming it's emulation. I don't think it's Game Boy hardware in the cartridge, but I'm not really willing to open it and find out. Regardless, it does play, but it is a bit slow, and you will notice graphical glitches once in a while. It flickers in odd ways, but certainly playable. When you press L1 and R1 together, you get the system's internal menu. This is actually where you can change some screen size options, set video sync, which I really couldn't tell if it did anything, and start the CD player, which will play the tracks in the CD that you entered. In my case, I put Glory Hammer, but I can't play that here for copyright reasons. Another interesting thing, if you're using a DualShock and have the analog button on, the system will not recognize the controller. You have to use the D-pad. Now, the system does have a palette color change option, and I did get this to kind of work at some point that I wasn't able to record, but it does crash the game in my experience. You are able to change the colors on the 4 different layers, but it never really works very well, and it's not a very useful feature. Interesting, but not useful. So there you have it, the Super GB Booster by Innovation. It's garbage, but it's interesting garbage. It does work. I was thinking about this, and it reminds me of the kind of stuff that kids on the schoolyard used to claim. Oh yeah, you can play your Super Nintendo games or your Game Boy games on your PlayStation. It's secret technology. I mean, it was those kind of rumors. It's those kind of rumors come to life. For $17, I don't recommend it unless you are a absolute retro game collector and like weird things. I'm surprised that this works on any level, and it's a novelty at best. But still, a working novelty for the most part. Sort of. Anyway, that is my, I guess you could call it, review for the Super GB Booster by Innovation. Please subscribe and let me know what you think. Thank you.